Reformed Church.
When you look at the Old Testament and you see the wrath in the Old Testament, or you could read Lamentations, or you can read whatever, Jeremiah, or you could read these different books in the Old Testament, and a lot of the wording and the verbiage there is really harsh. And I think sometimes Christians try to look at the harshness of what the Old Testament talks about and try to explain it away as being loving. Like, oh, actually, no, it's God is love, though, and he was only saying that for their good or whatever. But no, don't try to explain the Old Testament as being loving, because it's not. God specifically states that was not loving. And you may be like, what are you talking about? Like, you saying that God didn't love people in the Old Testament? No, that's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm actually saying is the opposite, that the harshness that you read, I know we were just talking about this, but the harshness that you read in the Old Testament, for instance, we were just talking symbolically about how Sarah dealt hardly with Hagar. Remember that? We just went over this. That's God acknowledging that that's harsh, that it's hard. God calls that harsh, and it does not call it love. And you may be like, well, you're saying God was God like different in the Old Testament, where you're saying that that's not love and God wasn't loving people? What I'm actually saying is that the Old Covenant, if you'll note in the Bible, says this all over the place actually, that the Old Testament was run by angels, was not run by God's Son. The Old Testament was not run by Jesus. The Old Testament was run by angels. And there's huge significance to that, in the sense that the Old Testament, the Bible says, was ordained by angels by the hand of a mediator. And so what that means is, what God is trying to show us with that, and also even Stephen, before he was stoned, he was preaching and he said that you've received the law by the agency of angels and you have not kept it. An angel is not God's, is not someone that explains God's heart. But Jesus actually is. Jesus is the exact representation of God, and he's the one that we look at to explain who God is to us. The Bible says he's in Hebrews, he's the brightness of the glory of God. That means he is the manifestation of God. He is what shows us who God is. And the Old Covenant did not come through Jesus. Actually, the Bible says that, right, that the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. And the reason why God, and even, okay, here's another thing, right? If you read in Hebrews chapter 1, you'll notice that he's comparing Jesus with angels constantly. And he's explaining that Jesus is greater than angels. And you might wonder, why is he comparing Jesus and angels? And actually, because he's comparing two covenants, one given by angels and one given through Jesus. And again, you may not see the significance of all of that until you realize God is pointing out the fact that the law was given by angels and run by angels to show you that is not a representation of his heart. The law is actually contrary, the harshness of the law is contrary to the heart of God. The law was not the will of God to implement. That's why you'll notice from the beginning, from the day that Adam sinned, if the law was necessary, or God's plan A, you could say, God would have given the law the second that Adam sinned. But God didn't give the law for thousands of years until the time of Moses. Why would God hold off that long to give such an important thing, being the law? Because God just wanted to teach people the gospel. And he was doing so through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, through Abel, and etc., through these believers. And the law only came through Moses, the Bible says, because people were transgressing the gospel. Galatians actually says that. It doesn't use the word gospel, but I could explain that to you if I had time. Because people were transgressing and rejecting the gospel. So God had to give the law because people were trying to approach God by works. So God had to try to prove people wrong, that you can't do that. And God had the law being run by angels. But it's important to note that the harshness of the law should not be explained as like, well, actually God was really loving people because whatever our reasoning is. No, that's not the love of God. But that's also not the nature of God. The law does not represent God. The law was run by angels. There's some interesting points with that. But anyway, the new covenant is the heart of God, which is why God began preaching the new covenant to people from the day Adam sinned, and even before that, talking about the gospel. Even when you see punishment, and I'll stop here, even when you see punishment and stuff in the law, you'll notice this is actually one of the first revelations that I remember the Lord giving me to sort of attract me to getting to know him more. Because I'd been taught all these different things from the law, and being taught that that was sort of just God doing these things, and it was sort of some sort of representation of God, or this is like a side of God. It's all this condemnation and punishment that you see under the law. That's like one side of God, whereas Jesus is sort of another side of God, which actually isn't true. Jesus is the only side of God, and all that punishment and condemnation. You see, under the law, you see punishment. Under the covenant Jesus established, you see God taking our punishment away from us. So which one is God? They're not different sides of God. Only one of them is who God is. And that's the desire to take punishment away from people, not the desire to condemn people. When Jesus came, he said, I don't accuse you. He said, you have one that accuses you. Moses accuses you. In other words, Moses is the giver of the law. He said, I don't accuse you. Well, is Moses the definition of God, or is Jesus the definition of God? Jesus is, not Moses. And therefore, when Jesus comes and says, I don't want to accuse you. I don't want to blame you. I want to take your blame away from you. Even when you deserved it, I don't want to blame you. I want to take the blame even when it was your fault. I want to take the blame away from you. You see that from Jesus. Whereas for Moses, you see, well, you did it, so I'm accusing you for it. You know what I'm saying? They're opposites. And the law is the opposite to the new covenant. And it's only the new covenant that represents God in his heart. And the law was never God's plan to implement. The law was only done because people wanted to approach God by works, and therefore God allowed Israel to go through that because Israel wouldn't come to him through Jesus.
We hope you enjoyed this message from Reformed Church. If you have, please share this with someone else and help us get this unpopular message to the world. If you'd like to support Reformed Church, you can do so at reforminus.com/give. Also on our website, you can take advantage of our free messages, articles, and even full discipleship courses. Start reforming your mind now at reforminus.com.